Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode here from Wiglet, your one-stop shop for all things books, beards and beyond. Today we kind of got a subscriber special, but also I've decided to make this, what you can see here, a mega mix of A-level English literature content. So I'll be going through not just Othello, not just a Raisin in the Sun, but the Great Gatsby as well. If you haven't already, please give this video a thumbs up, don't forget to subscribe and share the video with all your friends and family, and hit the bell icon for more books, beards and beyond. Now if you haven't already, be sure to give us a subscription or a follow across all our different platforms. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram and we are on TikTok. We're doing brilliantly right now and I thank each and every one of you for stopping by, really appreciate it. So let's get on to the video. As always, what can you do with this video? Take notes as you go, pause, drop me a comment. Remember the Wiglet guarantee. Every single comment is replied to within 24 hours, so I will make sure I get to you. In addition, test yourself. Use this as a way to help reinforce your knowledge and your understanding and make it a way to really grasp the big issues in the texts. But again, as I said, if there's nothing or certain things that don't make sense, feel free to drop me a comment and I'll happily answer them. All within 24 hours, that's the promise. And repeat. Go back through it, check back through it, through your notes, through the videos. I have a whole archive I'm building now, videos based around A-level as well as GCSE. So, before we start on context, there's a few reminders I really want to address about the nature of context at A-level English literature, because it's important, but there's also some things I've seen people do often that they get wrong. Now, context in itself is important in terms of understanding the text itself. Okay, if you're going to get a really good understanding of a Raisin in the Sun or Othello or any other text, then it's really important to know the background. Okay, what were the influences to the author? What inspired the author, or what did society look like at the time in order to help shape, influence, and create a greater understanding for the writer? If we get that, then we're not looking at the texts in some sort of vacuum. We're looking at them as the writer wrote them and produced them. Now, there's two different types of context. The first one is kind of context of production. Now, crudely, in an essay form, this would look like at the time the text was first performed or written. Our understanding of racial equality, our understanding of identity has shifted fundamentally over the centuries. So Shakespeare isn't going to be writing a character like Othello in the same time or era as we would now. That's kind of really important to grasp, and that's what's known as context of production. Now, the other part to this is what's known as context of reception, and that's how a modern audience or a modern reader interprets that text. So how does that come across to them? What does that look like? And how do we make sense of and pass judgments on characters like Othello and Desdemona, or even going back to the characters of A Raisin in the Sun and the way they are treated? Because while we've got to appreciate the times we live in are quite tumultuous and full of upheaval, the attitudes and value systems of the times that these texts were written in are very different. Now, a context has to aid, not harm your line of inquiry. The biggest problem I've seen students in the past do, particularly with A-level English literature, is that they end up putting too much of it in. And I like to think of it like kind of like cinnamon. It's like a very pungent and powerful spice or ingredient, but a bit too much of it can make you feel very ill. The same way that a bit too much AO3 can end up ruining your piece itself. So be careful on that. Now let's start with Othello. I'm going to work through this historically, and I'm going to apply timestamps once the video is uploaded so you can click to the important points as well. Now, Othello, the most important bit of context to understand is in the very protagonist himself, the Moor Othello. And with him comes so many different aspects of context that we've got to understand and appreciate that come from lots of different angles. For instance, the idea of ethnicity, the fact that he is described as the Black Ram by Iago at many points. He's often portrayed for his race and ethnicity and the values that are given to him because of that. But his ethnicity as a Moor is also a kind of religious aspect, because he's obviously of a Muslim background. Culture and age are also really important as well. He's seen as the other. He's treated with skepticism and fear because of an amalgamation of all four of these aspects. Because of his culture, because he's older than Desdemona, because he is black, but also because he is a Moor and the connotations that come with that, they all throw him into a sense of suspicion with the Venetians, that make up the majority of the play's cast. In addition, as I said, that sense of Moor creates an otherness to him. For him being a Moor, a really recommended practice I'd suggest is look into the attitudes and value systems around Moors at the time. He deliberately stands out, and not just on a superficial aspect of his ethnicity and how he looks, but in a deeper sense as well. He comes from this other land, this other world, and that otherness of his is the big driving wedge that Iago uses to separate the two of them and ultimately lead to his downfall and destruction. So this aspect of assimilation, okay, Othello is very keen to assimilate into white Christian Venetian society. Beginning of the play, he is a general in the Venetian army. We have to understand that Venice at the time was an extremely rich and powerful trading port. This is long before Italy as a nation is founded, and Venice relies on itself, as Venice is effectively an independent nation state. So what comes with that is aspect that he's trying to fit in. Assimilating is to fit in, and he is rather successful at it at first. He's one of the most powerful people in Venice through the army. However, it's often commented on from the very beginning with between Iago and Rodrigo, those exchanges. It's commented from the start on his differences. As well as this, we get this sense of dualities and two-sidedness throughout the play that manifests. For example, the orderly Venice and the chaotic Cyprus. As well as this, we have the black Moor Othello and the white fragile Desdemona. And this difference in these clashes and how they fail to coexist is really important. Now, an important point here, as to quote the actor Hugh Quaggi, who performed as Othello in 2015, is kind of authorial intent. We have, effectively, we can't overlook the fact that we have a white author writing a black character. And this idea of how one can create, or how Shakespeare could possibly create what is quoted as an authoritative and creditable profile of a genuine black man, to quote Hugh Quaggi there, is important. Okay, is Shakespeare? We will never have the answer, because obviously this is something lost in time. But Shakespeare is portraying a black male, a Moorish male, through the lens of his understanding of it. We would never know if Shakespeare ever met anybody who was a Moor in his time. We will also never know how this is enforced and how the racial connotations play out, or the deliberate nature of them. But it's important to remember that when Shakespeare is creating the character of Othello, he is creating someone through his lens and perspective. So it's just a little point that's worth noticing there. Now, from Othello, I'm going to move through history into the next text of the three we'll study, and that is The Great Gatsby, and the context to The Great Gatsby. First of all, one has to remember the following. It was an economic boom era in post-war America. Okay, this was an era where people were richer than they'd ever been before. Their living conditions were increasing at a faster rate than they ever had before. We have these aspects here that really play out when we look at Gatsby and the materialism surrounding Gatsby. In addition, as Fitzgerald once called it himself, he said that in the 20s we had a whole race going hedonistic, deciding on pleasure. It was, as it's known, the Roaring Twenties and the Jazz Age. These are all terms credited to this decade for great reason. We see that very prominently throughout the novel, really importantly, worth mentioning. In addition to this, we've got to remember this is the era of prohibition. The alcohol was illegal under the 18th Amendment of the United States Constitution, and the irony of this is it creates a huge upshot in the production, sale, and distribution of alcohol, which was then known as bootlegging. That's how Gatsby makes his money. So we have this balance of partying and liberality and freedom, but also the criminality and the criminal undertones and aspects that come with that. Really important to mention. Now, the American dream can't be overlooked. Okay, Gatsby desperately aspires to the American dream. He changes his entire identity as a consequence, renaming himself from James Gatz. We also have this aspect here of him desperately trying to assimilate, that word there again, assimilate and fit in with people that aren't his own. And finally, this is also in the 1920s, an era of the rise of gossip magazines and materialism. Okay, we see the gossip surrounding Gatsby, how he could have been related to the Kaiser, how he may have allegedly killed a man, and how he creates in his own gossip his self-invention of him going to Oxford, of him visiting all the capitals of the world, all these different aspects that are really forming his character. And with this, as I mentioned before, materialism, these characters have more than they ever have historically. And this boom era is something that creates the fundamental aspect of the character of Gatsby himself. And lastly, let's look at the context then of A Raisin in the Sun. A Raisin in the Sun is produced, performed and set some decades later than Gatsby, and it plays fundamentally on these notions of a pre-civil rights movement America. Hi there everybody, it's Gwiglet interrupting me, Gwiglet, to give you this a little bit of an update in my research. Now, I didn't want to publish this video without telling you this because I think it's really important. I don't want to go out there and give you the wrong information. You're my subscribers and I want to give you everything right and in as much detail as I can. So, Jim Crow laws. At the start of this video, I kind of alleged or mentioned that Jim Crow laws didn't really exist in Illinois. Not the case. What it actually is that they very much were in place, and in one particular important point that resonates through Lorraine Hansberry's play, and that is on racial segregation in terms of housing. So in the late 1920s, housing was white only and black, or as they would have referred to it there, as coloured only. What that means is that the very points that the play is set around this idea of assimilating into a white neighbourhood and purchasing a house in a white neighbourhood were the very things Lorraine Hansberry would have actually experienced. Now, the important thing to remember about this is not only was Lorraine Hansberry's father the person who took this to the Supreme Court, the uppermost judiciary body in America, and won, as a matter of fact. The law itself was abolished in 1948. It shows how that context of racial segregation, and in this case, what was effectively a Jim Crow law, actually influences the play itself and how those sort of laws very much were in existence. Now, at the time the play is set, they're gone. Okay, the play comes out in the 50s and it's set around approximately that time. So the characters would not have lived in an era where that was, but Lorraine Hansberry certainly did. And that's the important point you want to remember there, folks. So, to sum up, yes, there were racial segregation laws in Illinois, and they were abolished in Lorraine Hansberry's lifetime. She personally experienced those, but the characters and the time which the play is set, they would have been abolished. However, the legacy and the aftermath and the effect of that would have been important. Thanks as always, folks. Now, back to the video. This is an era before the advancements of Martin Luther King and his efforts, before the Civil Rights Act is passed, and we're living in a time here, or rather the characters are living in a time where the Jim Crow laws, these laws of enforced racial segregation, are extremely evident and apparent. However, they are the consequences of them. So in Chicago at this time, the characters at this point would not have actually had the enforced racial segregation as it was. However, what they would have had is the racial and economic inequality that would have come with it. So while people in the more northerly states, like Illinois, where Chicago is, they would not have had this direct, strictly enforced laws the southern states had. They would have had these differences, and this is one of the cruxes of the characters and how they try to, on their desperate wish to ultimately move to a white neighborhood and community, despite the reservations and protestations of the representatives from the white community. So we have to remember it's a time of segregation almost by stealth. The aspect in Illinois as the time would have been in Chicago would not have been explicitly legal. The northern states wouldn't have had that, but they would have had this idea of segregation and how one fits in and conforms and assimilates into the American dream. And that conflict with the American dream is important because while the dream is clearly there amongst the characters, what they don't have and what they lack is the ability to access them principally through the colour of their skin. The idea that they were to keep to their own, the idea that they are not welcomed necessarily into the white neighbourhood that they aspire to go to. And the play leaves us on a kind of unsettled aspect there of whether that integration and assimilation is successful. But the whole play is set against that backdrop of segregation, and not in necessarily a legal sense, but certainly in a racial and economic sense. The fact that it still would have been prevalent at the time, and that the characters would have had to contrast or clash, or their dreams would have clashed with that notion as well, is really important. So thank you very much as always for tuning in. Be sure to like, share and subscribe for more books, beards and beyond. Remember, we're across Twitter, Instagram and TikTok. Just search Gwiglet for more. The Gwiglet guarantee: every comment will be replied to within 24 hours. And until next time, All the very best. Take care, and bye bye.